So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Dan Farr, who is going to give you his introduction of where he is on this continuum of retirement.
Well, I've been retired for 2.5 years. I have 2 children who are attorneys. My son's counsel for Nordstrom, and my daughter took over my practice. After 2.5 years, life is good. Life is better. Primarily, the biggest thing in my life is I have a heck of a lot less anxiety every day, sort of. And I'll talk about that later.
Thank you, Dan.
As the song goes, I'm stuck in the middle with you. Clowns to my left, certainly a joker to my right. So I am in a 2-person partnership, a young woman, 32 years old, born 1 month before our twins, boy and a girl. And it's a 50% partnership. We negotiated a purchase, and it's working out very, very well. I sometimes say, when I asked how much longer I'm going to practice, I say 2 more years, and it just keeps being 2 more years. So I'm just like most of you, still trying to figure it out.
That's the way I had to kind of do it, too. I began practicing as an older lawyer, straight out of law school, and I became a partner in the firm and practiced in the area of business and real estate. My firm at the time I joined, I think, had 75 lawyers and 2 offices, one in Seattle and one in Tacoma. And I was the first woman that came on board, and so I had to behave myself. Now we have lots of women in our firm. My family is close. I lost my husband last year, so right now we're all kind of finding a new way to do things, including myself. And I'm so grateful that I had the ability to continue my practice as emeritus. And I began that about 3 years ago, or maybe 4 or 5. I lose track. But I know King County has a similar program as the one in Pierce County, where people who pass through an organization called CLEAR, which checks their validity as to people who need free help, and then passes them on to us, and we interview these people. And also the program in Tacoma has clinics where people can come in and have group. But I work personally 1 day a week and see 4 to 6 clients each week. And in Seattle, I know that they're organized so that my former partner, Jerry Greenan, who was involved here in Seattle, he used to interview people and then send them to somebody else to do the work. And Pierce County isn't fortunate enough to have that kind of an organization. So when I interview somebody, I normally do the work too. It's a very satisfying way to spend a day, except it's more than a day, of course, because when you're going to do the work, you're writing letters and making phone calls and doing all kinds of things. I used to go to court as emeritus, and that was always interesting because if you can imagine trying to conduct a trial without any money, there's no money advanced for trial work at all. It's just everyone has to volunteer. And one of my cases involved a land issue where a next-door neighbor was trying to take over 6 feet of my client's very precious property, and we had to go to trial and have a 3-day trial in order to get this sorted out. And I needed to have an expert, a land surveyor, to come in and tell the court professionally exactly what was going on here. And I finally found one, and the only reason he came on board for nothing was because he couldn't stand the lawyer on the other side. So we got lucky, and we also happened to win that case. But the emeritus program is a way to keep your finger in if you just can't let go, and I happen to be one of those persons. So I'm grateful for the program, and I always look forward to Wednesdays and just to see who's going to walk in the door. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Mitchell from Bremerton. As you probably know, Bremerton's a community of about 40,000 people in a county of about 250,000 people. And what we generally do there is help people solve their problems. Not a great deal of specialization, although land use is an area that people focus on, and of course the criminal practice. My practice has been varied since the beginning, and in recent years I've been able to pull back, as most of us do with age, and get away from trial practice. I think my last major trial was probably 4 years ago. It was a 3-week trial. And when I finished that, I said, this was a lot more fun at 36 than it is at 66. And like just kind of the opposite of what Dan was saying, the anxiety attendant to practice was starting to get to me. So it was time to move into a more transactional and estate planning and probate sort of a practice. I'm in the first year of a 5-year sort of phase out and go away agreement with my younger partners. They each bought a third of our firm. I still have a third. I'm still there 40 hours a week. I'm sure it annoys them a great deal, but they're kind. I think it was very valuable when I joined our firm that our then senior guy would meet with clients that he'd worked with for years, and would then bring them down the hall and introduce them to me and say, he's just the guy that you need. And I'm doing that now as well. So it's an entirely different sort of a practice than I was engaged in for many, many years, but it's pretty satisfying, and I can see the end approaching, and I'm having the opportunity to work into that rather than just walking in one day and saying, okay, I'm gone, and disappearing. So a lot of the things we're going to talk about today, I've been able to just do a bit at a time and not have a huge change in my life.
Okay.
I have 2 adult sons. One's a financial advisor with Morgan Stanley, and the other's a nuclear pipe fitter in the shipyard. They're both college graduates. I asked them one day why they didn't become lawyers, and they said, because we saw the way you lived for 40 years. And I think they're smarter than I am. So.
I'm Jay Hadley, and I'm in the process of phasing out in a way that, for me, is incredibly exciting. And I'm learning about the internet as a way to practice law while you're in another country. Last year, I spent 7 months in our home in Italy. And Charity, you tell me when it's okay to push buttons.
Whenever you want.
And so I've been able to have senior status, but be able to practice overseas for part of my time. This is our new home in Tuscany. And what happened years ago is that I started wanting to be proactive. I'd lived in Arizona. I'd practiced here a good part of my life. I wanted to go someplace different for retirement. And so I started looking at asking myself different questions about where to go. We looked at New Zealand, looked at the South Pacific, have family in South America. We're an international family. And so we wound up in Italy. Italy has a Mediterranean climate. We have 278 days of sunshine a year where we are. It's incredibly embracing. Some of my favorite words there are tranquilli, con calma. It's a way of getting away from the stress of life. Living this mill which we just purchased is in the countryside, and all you hear is a bird singing and the wind rustling in the trees and the brook that goes along beside it. I have some factors. We don't need to go through this now, but the different kinds of things we looked at in examining a home overseas. A big one of those is looking for an expat community, a place where you not only have friends from the local country, but friends from elsewhere, and proximity to good hospitals and so forth, which is one of the reasons we chose Italy. There's a research hospital close by and so forth. So when that day comes, that's there. So I'm just going to ring through some pictures fairly quickly. This map would be difficult to reach, but we're 20 miles from Siena, really in the heart of the UNESCO World Heritage Area known as the Val d'Orca. This is the village where we started. Our little village house is in the middle of that. This is the way into town. Our street, the house with the red flowers on the left, is our village house where we started this adventure. This is a sky picture of the same thing. The building, the larger building on the right, is where the Burrino, the restaurant, and so forth are located. There are no cars allowed in the village, so it's purely pedestrian. We wake up and live by the bells from this church. This is, I'll just go through some of these. This is from our village festival. The people in the foreground have a company called Ballooning in Tuscany that launches from the little valley where our mill is located. Beth, who's back in the corner, is my wife. This is a picture from our village festival. We're part of a different kind of community. Beth was cooking along with these other ladies for 250 people for 3 evenings in a row, learning Italian in a very fast way because neither one of us speak the language. Looking out the window, the same festival, flag throwing, just different kinds of activity. Our local bishop. This is what people do when they get to be 85, 90 years old. They walk down these streets and are there. We see little old ladies that are in their 85, 90 years old riding bicycles like this down the street. People everywhere. The aged are appreciated and loved in this country. Unlike here, I mean, there's a calm, steady pace, and people are loved. There's an older man when we walk up the steps toward this park, and he's 103 years old now, and he finally has a wheelchair, but he'd still be on his own. He's out hacking in the garden, but he got run over by a truck in his little motor scooter about 3 years ago. But it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful, stunningly beautiful there. It's a choice that we've made. It's cut me off, taking up too much time.
I'll cut you off. Now that we're all experiencing ridiculous amounts of envy, at least I am thinking I want to retire there right now. And you alluded to this a little bit in one of your slides. I know that folks, when they think about retirement, they think about, do I have enough money to retire? And do I have my health concerns taken care of? And am I healthy enough to keep on working? But those questions are ones that we're not really going to talk about here. I wanted to ask you, and I'll start with you, Jay, whether or not there are other things that you think they should be considering when they start considering retirement. And then after you answer, I'll just open it up to anybody else who wants to answer.
Other things outside of health concerns and money concerns? I think so. I think quality of life and having a sense of purpose, a reason you get up in the morning. At my high school reunion recently, a good many of my classmates were in Arizona, and I lived there. I have an appreciation for Arizona, but I said, well, do you love golfing? Because that's what they said they were doing. They said, well, golfing. I said, well, no, but it's something to do. And for me, I want to have something more than just to do. I want to have something. I want to be around history. I want to be around people. I want to be able to have interesting travel. And that's just personal, but there's things that speak to our passion. And I think we only get one shot at this, and we're reaching the end of this life. So it's time to do something that really speaks to us.
Anybody else want to add to that?
Well, if the question is, are there some other issues that we should address? I've been retired 2.5 years. I thought I was terminally unique. I represented other attorneys, many of them about 18 years my senior, and watched them go through this. I'm not terminally unique. When I retired, I immediately felt a sense of depression, a loss of status, and I need affirmation on a regular basis. I go to the neighbor for it. He's not inclined to give it to me. I felt like my Earth's axis had tilted a little bit. It took me about a year to get over that. I think it would be helpful if we expect that to happen. So in other words, we look forward to it. We know it's going to happen. And then I went to a counselor who's an attorney and a psychologist, and she specializes in attorneys in transition. Her name is Sue Freeborn. She's in Federal Way. I'm sure there's other good counselors, but she has a unique skill set with this, and she helped me with it with specific ideas, which we can ignore now unless you want to go through some specific ideas.
Sure.
She, and I did all of these. She said, when you leave the office for the last time, get into your car that's already running and get out of town. Don't come back. She says, leave for a month on a road trip. I did that with my wife. She said, identify projects and activities that you've always wanted to do, including little things like cultivating better friendship with people you've known for 50 years. She said, once again, acknowledge that you will experience loss. Talk to senior attorneys. Create your own support group. Cultivate friendships. Pursue things that you loved from prior experience. I have a little bluegrass band. I'm a storyteller. I have grandchildren. I meet friends with breakfast. My life is wonderful. But it took me a year to get over that hump of being down. And I think that the need for affirmation and professional status is what kept many of my lawyer clients from retiring as much as anything else.
Do we have any questions from the audience at this time? Or any questions online?
I do have an online question specifically for Jay about moving to another country. The question is, I've heard that Medicare does not cover medical care in other countries. What do you do about medical care and insurance in Italy? Does their system cover you?
That's a good question. And one of the things, there's a bunch of different ways to go about this. We have elected to spend a majority of our time there, so we have applied for and ultimately we've received residencia, and we have a permiso de soggiorno, which allows us to stay there on a semi-permanent basis. The reality is that I broke my leg over there. I went into the hospital. They set the leg, put a cast on, and the car charged me 35 euros. They have a public health care system there. They're concerned about, and one of the things that is part of this residency application process is to make sure that you have adequate resources to cover yourselves. Medicare, and I have a supplemental plan that will cover us while we're there up to 90 days. If we're there beyond 90 days, then we have to seek local coverage.
So I like to ask for the folks that are looking towards retirement but not fully there yet, what do you expect to miss? And I know that you've had conversations with some of your colleagues who have already retired, so that might inform it a little bit. And what are you actually looking forward to? So we'll end on the positive.
Well, if I could speak to that.
Yeah.
Dan touched on it just a little bit. Every day when we're in our offices, we have structured relationships with clients, and they tell us what their problem is, and we hopefully figure out an answer. If I'm home a lot, nobody has much regard for what I say, and that's going to be an interesting transition. And as Dan said, the loss of sort of status, although we don't think of it as that, but usefulness. It's all tied up in that same thing. I wanted to do two things in my life. I wanted to be a naval officer and I wanted to be a lawyer, and I've done them both. You know, it's kind of like, now what's the encore? And that's what I've got to figure out. But I think that's the interaction with your partners and the associates and the staff in your office is staged a certain way that you don't have outside of your office, and it's certainly something you appreciate. I've had the same legal assistant for 28 years and the same probate paralegal for 18. We get along really well. I don't know that that's going to translate well into post-retirement relationships. I'm also reminded of when I was a young lawyer, I had an older couple that I worked with, and the husband left the room for a moment, and I asked the wife, well, how's this retirement thing going? And she said, well, honey, I'll tell you, I took him for better or for worse, but never for 24 hours a day. And my wife and I have been happily married for 41 years, and I don't want to mess that up once I'm not spending a lot of time at the office. So there's going to be a lot of readjustments. And I'm like I said, I'm only 1 year into this 5-year plan, so I'm sort of progressing to where I want to get in retirement, and I'm some of the way there. But those are the issues that I can see. I have the good luck to be able to analyze what's happening as it goes, as I cut things out of my practice, as I no longer work weekends, as all of those things change. This is not working weekends. It's like a vacation every 5 days. How do you adjust to that? And then it gets longer, I'm told. So it's going to be a big adjustment, and it's nice to have your eyes open and work your way into it.
Well, so much of our self-worth is what we do. And you can have lots of other activities. I like to read. I'm a student of Spanish. I like to exercise. But there's so much that the legal profession provides me in terms of self-esteem. My wife is the head of counseling at Seattle Prep. We're close to the same age, and she's struggling with the same thing. So she's looking at retiring maybe in another year. She gets a lot of positive feedback from working with students, finding wonderful colleges for them, and lots of nice gifts and chocolate that I love to eat. And she doesn't want to give that up. And so we're both in that area. I just did an arbitration the day before yesterday, or was it yesterday? Lose track of things. And before the arbitration, mandatory arbitration. And I've been doing them for many, many years, and I'm thinking, is this something I should give up? And yet it was one of the most interesting arbitrations, learned about photography, stock photography, the whole business of it. And afterwards I go, well, I don't think I want to give that up. But there are certain things. Volunteer like you do at a couple of legal clinics, ELAP's multi-language clinic, and then also the King County Neighborhood Clinic in Bellevue. I feel like I'm at the top of my game right now in those things, because you bring all those experiences that you've had in practicing law, and you hope you're giving them the best advice, but it feels like you're bringing all the legal knowledge, the ability to look up the information while they're sitting there if you don't have it. The other thing that being an attorney at this stage, I'm active in the chamber now. I'm dealing with, I'm the sort of the lone liberal in a lot of the meetings dealing with public policy, but it's very interesting learning how to talk with people that you normally wouldn't agree with on most things, but yet, as we all can see with the election yesterday, we all have to learn how to get our system to work with problems, and it seems like this is where I'm at right now, and do I want to give that up? On the other hand, after watching Jay's pictures there, I don't know.
Well, I just put in my 2 cents here because I've been there and I know exactly what you're talking about. You do lose things like the corner office. I still have an office, but it's quite small. And so, that's kind of a little status thing you give up, but it's not that important. After a while, you don't think about it at all. It's easy to slide in and out of the office when you just have a small little office somewhere. Nobody pays any attention anyway. And to be able to continue your arbitration practice is something you can do as emeritus, I learned. One of the restrictions is you cannot accept money for legal services when you are an emeritus. And so you're unable to, help your friend do something and charge him anything, I guess. But you can do, or at least in Pierce County, they are saying that it is okay for you to do an arbitration, even though there's money involved there. It will go to the firm, and I can then, if I get a check, I can turn it over directly to legal aid, so I don't violate any rule that way. And they're very interesting to do arbitrations. They're always looking for people to do that. So not only can you help people individually with their problems, but you can also help your bar handle all of the arbitrations that have to be held.
Initially, I had some of the same concerns that are being raised by the panel. Although I guess my identity is not. I race cars for a hobby, and I'd rather think of myself as a race car driver than an attorney in some respects. I thought I would miss my friends and my partners and particularly my clients by taking on something like what we're doing. And quite the contrary, my secretary's scheduled time to come visit with her family. I have 3 partners that are lined up wondering when they can come over, and we're going to have to start juggling our schedule to accommodate the desires of so many people that will visit us. And so I'm finding, at least in the near term, a lot of continuity with those people, clients, friends, partners, business associates in the transition. That's very, very supportive.
Did you read 1 Year in Provence?
I'm aware of it. Yeah. And we're going through that.
Yes, I'm sure you are.
We have an online question at this time.
Yeah, this is a question for Charlotte about professional liability insurance. Do you need that when you volunteer emeritus, or do you have a tail policy that covers that? How does that work?
The organization that I do the work for at Legal Aid has malpractice insurance. And my firm has tail insurance, when I was practicing there. And I'm still there. I should say that I am fortunate because I have a secretary and I have, she's not a full-time to me, but I do have the services I need in order to be effective.
I think, too, I'd just add to that some malpractice insurance carriers will consider emeritus status pro bono work to mess up your tail, and other ones won't. So it is something to look at when you're going towards it, to make sure that you look at your policy and that you're properly covered and not destroying your coverage from before if you have that tail insurance. Do I have any questions from the present audience? No? You guys are very quiet. Oh, good.
Everybody's speaking about firms.
Oh, wait.
But I'm a sole practitioner. Everyone's speaking about firms and hanging on to the firms and their partners and so forth, but I'm a sole practitioner with no secretary. I do all my own work, and so I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about how you would make that transition as a sole practitioner with no support staff.
I'd like to take that.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of young graduates from law schools trying to find jobs, and they aren't out there unless you're maybe the top 5% of your law school class. One of the things I did to bring in this young woman, partner of mine, a number of years ago, started looking at what's involved in selling a practice. And I finally concluded the best way to do it and the best way to get some value back for all the years that you've been working, the goodwill that you've created, was to enter into a partnership. And by bringing in a young person, one, initially as an associate, so that they don't have to be paid too much. Two, you're in a position to mentor them. And I know I've talked to some attorneys that have attempted this and the personalities weren't right, or in one case, one woman attorney said, I was ready to turn it over, and she said she really didn't want it. And so maybe the conversations weren't quite right in the beginning, but you do need to really communicate with who you might have come in. I was very fortunate that some other attorneys, Jessica Beck is my partner, she worked as a paralegal, and she was going to law school, and she said, I'd like to become involved in estate planning. So Pat Trudell contacted me and said, hey, we've got someone here that you should meet, going to Seattle U Law School. So I hired her as basically a paralegal initially. Worked for 2 years during law school, graduated. She became my associate, and then after about a year and a half, we entered into the partnership. And it's real good. The only bad part is many of my clients now want to see her and not me. And so it's not uncommon that I'm going in going, another client stolen from me. But that's the purpose of what we're doing.
And who is Pat Trudell?
Another attorney, a personal injury attorney in Kirkland. So she had been working in personal injury and had enough of it to decide she didn't want to do that anymore.
Does anybody else want to comment on the solo practice and leaving practice as a solo practitioner?
I've seen in Pierce County some of the sole practitioners kind of join up as they get further down and are beginning to think about retirement, to join their practices and make it possible to bring in other people. Otherwise, I think unless you have really good clients that would go to another lawyer, so that it might be an advantage to a person who's buying your practice. I think for most solo practitioners, it's really difficult to do that, to sell a practice.
For those of you who considered selling, if you were an owner of a practice, or the options that I see there are that you could merge with another firm, and then sort of slip out of the practice, or you could bring somebody in and sort of raise them up through the ranks, or you could sell to another individual. Did all of you that thought about how you were going to do this transition consider all of those different options? And would you like to talk about why you picked the one that you did? I know, Dan, you transitioned also. I guess yours is unique. I don't know if you gifted it to your family or how you did that. I
had a law partner for 25 years, Roger Gustafson. He retired several years ago, about 12 years ago. And I got a phone call from my daughter, her third year of law school at the UW. And she said, "I want to practice with you, Dad." And that was my solution. But I had planned on... I'd actually planned on going to the law schools. They have an interview. My practice is primarily estate planning, and I had planned on doing it to my dear friend next to me who says I'm a comic, and I just want you to know I've heard that comment once. So, and in my case, it was a family transfer. I own the building, so I'm renting the building to her, but basically, for the most part, it was just a father-daughter deal.
Mm. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes, John.
Our firm has been around for a long time. It's the oldest firm in Bremerton, and we've been as large as 9 and as small as 2. And when it was 2, it was awfully lonely because I was concerned about what if the other one left. What was I going to do? And now we're at 5 lawyers, and things are considerably different. But there's so many reasons to be concerned about that. I mean, your good clients that have been with you for years, do you really want them to go to some stranger who you won't know how he's going to treat them? What are you going to do with the value of your practice, which is certainly there, but I think we've all read the RPCs about selling practices as going concerns. Other than passing it down in the family, certainly I think having sat there and looked at it, and I was ready at one point to just say, well, that's it, I'm gone. Button her up. And I just couldn't bring myself to do it because we'd had clients that had been with us for, 30, 40, 50 years, second, third generations. I just felt like a real creep if I was going to walk out on them. And that's one of the reasons I kind of hung in during some lean times to make our practice continue to function and operate. And that's really all I can think for you or for any solo is there somebody out there you want to partner up with that you can sort? In the history of our firm, we've had 19 lawyers. 9 have become partners. The other 10 didn't make the cut. So you've got to work on identifying the personality of the person that is going to succeed you. And I think we just pretty much, under those circumstances, have to grow our own successors, or just be willing to put a padlock on the door and move to Yakima. It's just get out of our hometown.
I just attended the 2-day CLE on estate planning, that if you're in the estate planning field, it's almost a mandatory CLE to attend. Talked to an attorney that I think is a few years younger than I, and he's there keeping up his credits, but he basically said, I closed my door. We had an older attorney practicing with a small partnership I was in a long time ago, and I saw his clientele just stop coming to see him. In the estate planning, probate, wills area, trust, you're too old. Your clients would like to have someone younger there to work with their family on their death. And so part of the reason for bringing a person in was partially flexibility. If I wanted to keep practicing, it's important to have a younger person there so my clients would still want to come see me. The other part is that without having someone there, you lose the value. You have a lot of goodwill that you've developed over the years, and it's not like your clients come see you every month, but they might come see you every 5 years. And if you can still keep that database, the names, the connection, and as these other attorneys have talked about, gradually making that transition, my clients love Jessica. In fact, at this point, I think they'd rather see her than me, and that is really a good thing.
Do you have any questions online?
Yeah, I've got one question for Mr. Farr about your article. It was in Northwest Lawyer. Do you remember what month it was published?
It was published September of 2013.
Okay, September of 2013. I think you could probably still find that online on the WSBA website. And then a question for all of you. Somebody might want to take this one. Can any of the speakers address partial retirement, where you limit your practice to 2 or 3 days a week? Does that ever really work, or do you just end up coming back in the office to attend meetings and calls on your days off?
I'd like to respond. I tried that before I retired. 3 days a week. 3 days a week for me were 7 days a week, and sleepless nights and anxiety at 3 a.m. It never worked for me. Now, it may work for others, but not for me.
I did that as a part-time lawyer before I actually retired. And it was because I became a grandmother and I needed to spend some time with those little people. And so I did cut it back. Some people didn't obey the rules. The same group that when I finally did retire kept calling me anyway. People that you've worked with for a long time in the business area particularly, they'll call up, this is just a really short question. And so, it's hard to break the tie. But you can do that. You just have to take the time. Our firm has a policy for a 3-month sabbatical. And the purpose of that is to get you out of the office. You can take one every 7 years. Get you out of the office. And more importantly, you have to find a lawyer to cover every one of your cases. Every client has to be covered within the office. And you have to let them know in writing who that is, so that if something comes up while you're gone, they know who to call. So we kind of had this almost retirement experience in the sabbatical program, but it did make you understand that there is actually somebody else who can do what you do if you're not there.
I've run sort of variation on that. I only see clients on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but I'm generally in the office 5 days a week. It's just that without clients on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I can have my weekends free because I can get my documents drafted and get all of that done. And if there's something that I want to schedule that I need to do, come to Seattle for some personal reason, I've got my choice between Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays to schedule that in advance. I am finding, however, that even after just a year, the migration to my partners is much more rapid than I wish it were. And to the extent that you want that to happen, that's a good thing. If you're really ego-bound in your clients, then it could be a bad thing. But I think it's a good intermediate step. It seems to be working well for the lawyers I practice with and for me. It just gets that pressure off. When I was in full-time practice, I was either in court or meeting with clients 5 days a week, and Saturday and Sunday is when I drafted documents and pleadings and did all of that stuff. And I just got to the point where I couldn't maintain that pace any longer. And now, between doing away with litigation, having people that are fully competent to do anything that I was doing. Getting rid of that pressure and anxiety has been wonderful. Really where I needed to be. So I think that's a good intermediate step. If you're not part-time, you're still there, you're still answering phone calls and being sure that the workflow is well managed, but you just don't have the individual, you don't have the pressure on your individual production that you formerly had.
I've been working part-time this last year, but not part-time in the sense of 3 days a week or whatever. I found being overseas that we're able to pull up the internet during the hours where it's morning in Seattle. Most of the emails and most of the business questions and so forth come through that in that time frame. I'm able to respond. I'm able to line up other people that I work with to answer questions and sort of to, if you will, to manage the practice. As a practical matter, I'm a business attorney. I work on many larger sorts of transactions and it's pretty much a national practice. So as a practical matter, you don't meet with clients on a highly frequent basis. And most of what I do, at least, I've been able to accomplish in sort of a phase-out mode in 2 or 3 hours a day just by clicking on the internet and having a set time frame in which people are expecting me to respond. That said, it's an incredibly inefficient process because you don't log the hours that way. You can manage, you can keep things moving, you can keep people satisfied, you can see that people's calls are returned, but from a financial standpoint, it's not very efficient. But it's certainly a good way to transition, which is the primary reason I've been doing it.
I would like to respond on behalf of small community lawyers. These guys are obviously from big towns and more sophisticated than I am, but listen to this. So in a small community, I was on the school board 8 years, 17 years chairman of the Juvenile Court Conference Committee, founder of a local charity that provides food, shelter, and clothing for people. I've been too visible. The town was 4,000 when I got there. It's now about over 12,000. We serve a population of 47,000. My office has been in the same place for almost 40 years. Farmers come into town. They don't have an appointment. They see my car out front. They come in at 7:30 in the morning to have coffee. Just ask one question. It lasts an hour. I don't think a small community lawyer who's been active in his community can work part-time ever. At least that in my case, unless I'm extremely rude, and I'm not. So from a small community standpoint, life is different.
Really loud.
That's nice.
All the panelists have talked about either their current retirement or their plans for retirement, and they all involve some aspect of the law, like we're wedded to the law. And I love my work, but I don't want to be wedded to the law. So I'm wondering if anybody's considered, and I would love to go to Italy. And let me know when the guest room's available. I actually do speak Italian. But if that's not an option, if going to Italy or racing cars isn't an option, what are some other options? Or have you all considered things other than being emeritus status and volunteering at legal clinics, which is really, I'm a legal aid lawyer, and we love the volunteers and we love people who continue to do that work. But what are other things that people have considered, as Daniel said, to sort of make this rich and important and valued life outside of the law?
I'm a farmer. We raise cattle. I ride horses. And I have a lot of fences to keep repaired. I have lots of other interests other than the law. And I can never get everything done.
I have had certain interests throughout my legal career that weren't related to the law. I was a trustee for Olympic College for 8 years. I'm currently the Bremers, who started Bremerton, left all their property to a trust that's administered for the benefit of the college. With the retirements that are pending among the trustees, I may take over as the managing trustee, which involves real estate management, leasing, that sort of stuff, as well as dealing with the stock portfolio. So that's not really a legally tightly related thing. I mean, seeing that commercial properties are leased up, I guess I could read the lease and see if I thought it was any good, but that isn't the goal of that. I also ran into an attorney when we still had 3 attorney arbitrations, and his retirement project was to assist the counselors at the local high school in getting students enrolled in colleges and universities where they'd be the best fit. And it just turns out that my Rotary Club 2 years ago started a thing called AVID, where people with at least a baccalaureate degree meet with students that are from families where no one has ever gone to college, and they have no clue what the future has in store for them. All they know is it costs a lot of money, and it's just scary as hell. And I would anticipate increasing my activity there, either with that program or with the permission of the district, directly with students that I could serve. I think that would be a really good way to spend my time, and I wouldn't have to be proofreading legal documents and be involved in the inherent conflict of the practice. So those, and then my wife and I like to travel. We spent a month in Central America this year. We can always continue to do that sort of thing. And for 50 years, I raced sailboats, and I've been out of that for the last 3 or 4 years. And I wouldn't want to go back into it the extent I had, but I can do that on a reduced scale and actually cruise a little bit, which always seemed boring, but is more appealing as I get older. So, I mean, there are things out there that I've planted the seeds for now, but I just need to bring to fruition. I think, like everything else, you got to plan ahead and kind of see where you want to go and what's going to work. I certainly don't anticipate. A friend of mine died after practicing for 61 years. I saw him in court Friday. He was dead the next morning. I'm not going to do that. A lot of the lawyers in our community have completely failed to retire. I used to laugh with them that they should retire at 65, from 65 to 70, and then come back at 70, because by then all their friends are dead and they wouldn't have anything else to do. But as I approach 70, it's not nearly as humorous as I thought it was when I was in my 40s. And I do not intend to practice until the day I die.
I have intentionally tried to do everything I can not to be involved with the law, with one exception. I'm writing articles about our profession, and they're critical, and so, but they're not really dealing with the law in a technical sense, but they're dealing. I tried to stand back and look at the profession, and I'm writing another article that may not be published by the bar because it may be too sarcastic, but other than that, other than writing, I'm doing I've been turning down. I've been asked to be on boards of all kinds, and I've been turning them down because a lawyer on a board becomes a lawyer for the board, and so I'm turning that down. I want to know what life is like after practicing law for 40 years. I think I was on the top of my game when I retired. I know I was. I felt good about myself. I would do the same thing over again. I'd be at the same community. I'd want the same clients. I'd put up with the same anxiety, but I'm trying to do something different. I play music. I have a little band. I've been doing that for 40 years with some old friends and family members. I work very actively and frequently every week with a support group with guys in trouble, and I deal with that, and it's a win-win for me dealing with those guys. I'm a storyteller. I've been a storyteller for 20 years to children. I'm known as Mountain Man Dan in one first grade classroom in Enumclaw. I have a full-size Sioux teepee. I'm not making this up. I put up every summer in by my cabin in southern Puget Sound. My greatest goal and joy in life is scaring the hell out of sixth grade boys with ghost stories. So I love my life. I'm just trying to expand it beyond the law. I don't want to look backwards. Maybe in another I'm keeping my license, and maybe in another 5 years I'll come back. But right now, I don't want to come back. I want to, cut the cord as much as I can.
It almost sounds like you're on another path of self-discovery. Like we have our first path of self-discovery when we're a kid, and then...
That's exactly right. I lost myself after 40 years of practicing law. I lost who I was, and I'm going back to be a 12-year-old again. That's my goal.
I want that retirement too. Sue indicated she had a question online.
Yeah, there's there's a couple comments from the online audience along the same lines. Not really questions, but I wonder if a retiring attorney ought to consider totally ending any connection to the law and taking up new activities. In my case, I intend on focusing on art and reading. And then someone else said things that they do. They sit as a court commissioner pro tem. They day trade stocks. They golf. Arbitrator for FINRA and MAR and other private parties. There's no end of staying involved. So that's some other ideas. And then I have a question, too, that came in. Do any of you have any lawyers or friends in your support groups or circle of friends who have retired from government work? And how do those lawyers that don't have trial or transactional experience manage their transition as a volunteer to doing some kind of pro bono work?
Well, the only ones I know are retired from the Department of Defense, and reading ridiculous contracts for a living doesn't translate into anything on the outside. So when they retire, they walk away. But they've also got wonderful pensions and have had good benefits, so they don't really need to worry about that. But they're going to need to start over with whatever they do. And most of them find that's pretty easy because they haven't enjoyed their work that much. When you're reading the same standard form contract 5 days a week, you can easily tire of that. So they're ready to move on. Also, frequently they retire at age 55, and so they've got plenty of years to find other things to do. Just as an offhand comment, every year we have the newly admitted lawyers come to our county bar lunches, and I'm always asked, is the first person, what advice do you have for these young people? And it's always get a government job. And part of it's because of the pension and the ability to retire young and have a meaningful second career.
I've always been pretty involved in volunteer work, and I assume that I will still be. I joined the Kiwanis Club about 9 years ago. Once the kids graduated from college, I go, ooh, I think I could take on something else. And I regret not having joined when I first started practicing, because it's such a good group of people and wonderful friends. One of the volunteer things I'm doing right now is chairing a committee called the Kirkland Promise Committee, and it focuses on education. And Kalamazoo Promise was the starter here, and they have a scholarship for all graduates of high school. 5 families donated $250 million. And everything sounds wonderful there, but what happens is these kids graduate, 60% of them are on free and reduced lunch, so they don't have the skills when they get into college, and they're not performing. So then they're beginning to look at early childhood education as a way to help them. So a number of us went back there and learned about the program, and a lot of them said, from Lake Washington School District, why are you here? Because most of the programs there have been started, promise programs for communities that are really failing. So we came back and looked at it some more, and so we said, okay, we have a high graduation rate, but we still have students that we're losing. Let's look at early childhood education. So we got into studying that greatly, and now we're beginning to focus on the knowledge, the research that's being done on birth to 3 or birth to 5. And the University of Washington here is just a great resource. Professor Kuhl and her husband, there's some other professors there. So basically, this is one of the things that I've always enjoyed being involved with education, whether on a board of a school, and it's the one thing I see that I will continue. Another thing that my wife says is more or less just talk, and it might be, I just finished a 1,200-page book of the history of Cuba by Hugh Thomas in Spanish. And I'm kind of interested in going to Cuba and trying to figure out a way to do it legally. And one way you can do it is if you're doing original research that's likely to be published. And my friend Chris Fox, I was telling him about this idea, and he says, well, I can help you with the publishing, because he's got a 250-member newsletter on dissolutions. And he says, I'll do the dissolution part, you do the research and the estate planning probate in Cuba, and we'll publish it. So who knows? It might just be talk, though.
I'd like to add just a bit to this, and if nobody has a comment on this, I completely understand. But in my research for this presentation, I also found a book about Encore careers, and the way that they define that on Encore.com is Encore careers combine personal fulfillment, social impact, and continued income, enabling people to put their passion to work for the greater good, which sounds very cool. If the old golden years dream was the freedom from work, the dream of this new wave is the freedom to work in new ways, on new terms, to new and even more important ends. The goal, doing what you love, helping others, and getting paid for it. So I'm curious if any of you, if that sounds attractive to any of you, and if it does, whether you'd pick law or something else. Basically doing another career. Anybody consider it? Yeah.
I think I'm done with careers. But there are a lot of things that one can do in retirement. As panelists say, that it can be incredibly rewarding and that really work for us. We're fortunate to live in a beautiful part of the country. It can be as simple as hiking, being a guide for mountain trekking, or any number of things. I just encourage people to go back to when they were kids and see what they enjoyed doing then, and then try to be a kid again while we're able.
Thank you, Jane. Anyone else? I guess maybe we're not that into the Encore career. But if you are, I have the book in the lending library, the LAP lending library, and we can lend it to you.
I have two questions. The first one addresses the emotional adjustment that is needed upon retirement, and the second relates to a prospective diminution in, let's say, capacity. With respect to the first, by way of background to my question, I've practiced law for 54 years, and I've been happily married for 56 years. The other day, I asked one of my compatriots who has recently retired, how is the adjustment coming? And he told me about the lawyer and spouse who took the advice that one of you gave to take a trip immediately following closing your office door. And so they bought a motorhome to tour the country. And he spent the day up in the cab, and she spent it in the back. And they met for dinner. Now, they have a problem of emotional adjustment, but I don't think that's unique. And I'd be interested in hearing what your comments would be about how you make that adjustment. Because if you're around the house, it's not what your spouse has been used to.
I've become an expert on this, unfortunately. When I first retired, I've been married 46 years, and I told my wife in the morning, we need a staff meeting. And so I need to know what you're doing today, and I'll tell you what I'm doing today. That lasted 2 mornings, and we are having have had a serious adjustment on, I call it the jurisdictional issues of the household. Her jurisdiction's inside the house and mine's outside, but that's changed. Her jurisdiction's inside the house, plus pruning the garden, and I'm limited to mowing the lawn, and she doesn't like the way I mow the lawn. So I'm being serious. There's a problem, adjustment problem, and there has been going on for 2 years. We're getting better, but it is a problem, and so husband and wife have to work through it. But and I think that's a good point you made, because it's something that we should anticipate. I didn't anticipate this. I had no idea that I was going to be facing this, and she's put up with me. So it is a problem we should anticipate.
I'll have to say that didn't ever was never a problem for us, but I had a professional husband who actually retired after I did. And we both had so many fingers in so many pies. We would say hello in the morning, and we'd both be gone for the day anyway, whether we were working or not. I think you both need to have activities before you land at home. I have many friends who are not that fortunate, whose husbands really do just come home and read the paper and maybe go out and have lunch with a buddy, and other than that, they're underfoot. And, you have to look from a woman's point of view. They've been running that household for a lot of years, and they're used to being able to have their own free time to do what they need to do and not have to trip over whoever's sitting around. So it is a problem, but I think if you can both be headed down something, not necessarily the same path, but something you really. My husband's passion was airplanes. He flew in air shows, and he had biplanes. He would sell the rides in the biplanes at our rotary auctions, and he had a whole passion for this other thing other than engineering, which was what his field was. And if you're fortunate enough to have a wife or a husband who will pick up on their own side of what they really care about, I don't think you're going to have a problem. I think if you drop in on a wife or a husband who just isn't used to having you around, I can see how that would get a little old. Yeah.
Anybody else?
The second question, I'm not sure any of you are old enough to be apprehensive about this. Let's call it an occasional failure to have instant recall.
Everybody in the room, raise your hand.
How do you prepare yourself for what's almost inevitable?
Well, I'm going to be 80 next month, and or I guess 2 months, and I do have times that I don't think of the word I really want. And my husband was very good about picking up where that word wouldn't come if it was a family person. And I kind of did the same thing for him. Now, when I give legal advice to people, I don't go beyond what I know. I don't do anything that I haven't done before because I know I'm not as quick as I used to be. I don't go to trials anymore. The one I had on the property line was the last one I had, and I wrote the most beautiful findings of fact, and the judge said she was going to rewrite them, which she did, and they only took about 3 paragraphs, and mine was 4 pages. And I told her at the time she signed hers that I thought mine were much more interesting because, all the facts were there. Well, that's not the way you practice law. That's an example of why I knew I should hang it up, because she was right in doing this very simple chapter, and I was simply writing a book.
I have a question for you. You mentioned you don't speak Italian, so how do you deal with the language barrier? Are you taking lessons?
Yes. I've been going overseas for years and years, and we tripped onto this area, and I asked myself, well, if possibly Arizona, why not here? And the reality is that you can do things at different levels, and you can buy a little village house there for $150,000, have a place to camp and so forth. Being a part of a community is essential. And if you hang out, the barino there is really, it's not a bar, it's a coffee shop or whatever. And you meet people being part of, as Beth was, cooking for the Contrada dinner. People are jabbering away at you, and there are a lot of people that speak English and help you back and forth. We've done a lot of major remodeling in our homes there, and there's a lot of waving of hands and drawing pictures, and pretty soon I knew what the Bagna Sotto de Scala was. It was a bathroom underneath the stairs because that's where the guy was working, and so you start picking up things. There are some incredible tools. It's so much easier today than it was at one time. I have an app on my phone. It's a translation app. You can go to Google Translate or any number of ways. Bing to translate if you're writing letters or whatever. I used to have an assistant that helped with the geometry that's helping us with redesigning parts of the house. Now I do it solely one-on-one with him through translating, through doing drawings, and just through rapport. And it really works. You can really pick it up quickly that way.
I've had just the opposite experience. I lived in Panama as a naval officer.
John, speak into the microphone. I can't hear you.
In 72 and 73, and I developed some capacity with Spanish. It's gone. My wife has family members that live there, and when we go down to visit, I am so frustrated so quickly. And then maybe it's because we haven't gone back and spent extended periods of time there, but I found it to be a significant problem. I can read Spanish language newspapers, I can do all of that, but when I'm in a social setting and 4 or 5 people are talking at the same time, which is pretty typical for Central American people, it drives me nuts. So, different people have different experiences, and certainly mine are different than my colleagues here.
It's a cultural thing. Why Italy? It's because people in Italy are calm. I mean, they talk this way a lot, but they're really friendly, they're really outgoing, they're really accepting, they're really interested. I'd never go to France without the language because it's different. But at least in this set, and in a rural, the other thing is that it's shameful for us perhaps, but English is the first language of the world. And no matter where you go, you'll find people that speak English or have some English facility. They teach English in all of the schools in Italy, and they teach English throughout all the schools in Europe. You meet people, do you speak English? No, but you start rattling, and then they start talking back to you. And so it's not as difficult, at least in a European setting, as one might think.
Malcolm Gladwell says to be good at anything, it takes 10,000 hours or 10 years. So 8 years ago, I decided I wanted to become fluent in Spanish. And I started reading on vacation, and I started looking up every word that I didn't know, most words. And as time has gone on, my day gets more and more filled with Spanish. I listen to La Grande radio station, very fast Spanish. I'm still learning new words from that. I read, when I'm working out in the morning, I'll get almost an hour of reading in Spanish. And at night, after my wife goes to bed, I'll watch I have 20 channels that you can get through Comcast, costs about $15 a month. And I'll look at a movie, maybe a half an hour, maybe I'll get caught up and go 2 hours. And also there's a meetup group that if you go up on Google Meetup Spanish, you can find different groups that gather once a week, once a month, twice a month, and you can go there and you can speak with other people. In Kirkland, we've created an informal group that meets twice a month, and we all sit around and we talk. And so far, there's no native speakers. It's some of the worst Spanish pronunciation you've ever heard in your life, especially if you've trained it from these movies and things. But no one's afraid of making mistakes. And the reality is you need to be in that social milieu. You have to practice speaking. I'm a good reader. I'm still working on the speaking.
I'm going to check in with Sue because I think we have an online question.
Yeah, they wanted to know the book that you mentioned in Charity about Encore Careers.
It's called Encore Careers.
Yeah, that is the title. Just
it is
Encore
the
Careers.
title.
Okay.
It is in the Lawyer Assistance Program Lending Library, and if you email lomap@wisba.org, which is Aaron Burt, the assistant for the program, he administers that library too, and he would be happy to lend it to you.
All right, and then I have another comment and a question if there's time to do that. This is a little bit of a longer comment from someone online. I read a book shortly before I retired 5 months ago called Life Reimagined, which was written in conjunction with AARP. One thing that had me hung up in deciding whether to retire was the feeling that I needed to have a very specific plan in mind in order to retire well. The book, however, flipped my thinking and made me realize that not having a specific plan might actually be beneficial in that you can be open to opportunities that come your way that you had never considered. In the 5 months I've been retired from a government practice, that has provided to be the case for me. I've been asked to get involved in a number of non-legal volunteer boards, activities, and committees in new areas I never contemplated. In addition to lots of travel, I'm feeling very fulfilled with these new opportunities. So the bottom line is that I'd highly recommend the book. Again, it was called Life Reimagined, to anyone who might be hung up on this issue as I was.
That sounds like a good book for our library, too. I'm going to have to.
And then there's a question here that Mr. Farr sort of addressed a little bit in the beginning, but can you recommend any type of counseling or specific counselors for mental and emotional health, group therapy, or books or references to help with the depression or other emotional components of retirement and the loss of self-esteem that may result?
There's a lady attorney in Federal Way named Susan Freeborn. She's also a psychologist. She specializes, she does a number of types of counseling, but her focus is counseling attorneys in transition She's in her 50s. She's been an attorney a long time, and her husband's an attorney. I've sent a number of attorneys to her. They've been very. I look good when I do because they call me back and said, she's great. Now, she helped me, and she helped me through the emotional issues with the transition. The problem with me and some of my fellow attorneys is that we think we can handle everything. We're in control. I'm in control of this deal. I'll let you know what the perimeters of this is going to be. Well, that's not a good idea when you retire. She's been a great resource. I'm sure there are other resources, but she has a unique skill set for us. Susan Freeborn, she's in Federal Way.
We also have a few books in the LAP Lending Library and the LOMAP Lending Library that address that issue. But I'm not thinking of any of them except for the one that I read from at the beginning and the Encore Careers off the top of my head. We have a transitions book, which might be helpful. And then I also believe if you call Dan Crystal in the LAP program, he should be able to have some referrals specifically for you too. Does anyone have an opinion on whether or not you need a therapist that particularly understands lawyers, or do you think any therapist would do? I don't have an answer for that.
The advantage of a therapist who understands lawyers is you don't have to educate them.
Yeah.
If you haven't been practicing law for a long time, or if you haven't been practicing law at all, how can you as a therapist understand the pressures and anxieties that a lawyer goes through, their education, their background, what keeps them awake at 3 a.m? I didn't have to educate this woman. She knew exactly, when I walked in and looked like I was, been shot in the head, she looked at me and in my retirement, she said she knew exactly what was going on. She asked me a few questions and then we were on our way. And so that's just my opinion.
Any other questions from the audience?
I was just going to make a comment. I had a senior partner who's no longer with us, but he had a great phrase. He said, "The law is the jealous mistress." And this is really true. Once it's in your head, it does not go away, whether you retire or not. And I don't think that should be considered any kind of a disadvantage. You look at the world differently, and you understand things differently, but you're not practicing law about it. It's just always there. You have become a lawyer, and you will never get rid of that little mistress in your head, because you look at a document or you hear somebody say something or somebody does something, and you in your head know exactly what the situation is for that person. And I think we should all just be awfully glad that we have had the opportunity of a career in law.
If I could chime in before your question, I totally agree. The skill set that we develop as lawyers is an incredible asset. It enables us to do things and to make choices and to seek solutions to problems that would be beyond most people. This challenge that my wife and I have gone through was much, much easier and doable without consultants and outside people, just because we thought of as lawyers, we knew what the forms were about, what was a challenge in another country, another social setting, but it was really that skill set that enabled us to get through this and to really to tackle something that may be offsetting for most people.
One piece of advice I've been given, and there's been contradictory statements here today, is that for the first 2 years, make no commitments. What are your thoughts?
That's what she told me, and I believe that. I mean, that's why I'm 12 years old now. It's and accused of being unfiltered by my wife. I have turned down everything that had to do with the law, and all boards. I want to know what it's like for 2 years. Things come to you. If I fill my life up with activities, I'm going to miss out on something. I've been in a bad accident, and I fully recovered, I think, and it resulted in a craniotomy. And I was talking to my doctor afterwards, and he said, "You're lucky to be alive," and everything went great. But he said, and he supported the lady I saw about transitioning and emotional issues. He said that, and he's a kind of a spiritual guy. He said, "I think there's something waiting for you, because you didn't die here. I think there's something out there for you that you're supposed to complete." And I asked him, "What is it?" And he said, "You and I don't know yet, but it's out there." And I kind of like that. I kind of like that philosophy,
So we are nearing the end of our time here, and I would like to encourage anybody who wants to stay afterwards to talk, to get cards, and hopefully several of you could stay for a few minutes afterwards. But I also just want to ask what law looks like from your vantage point now, because that's been sort of a theme that's come up several times, and I know. Dan, I think this has to do with your article, so I will open it up to you first.
I just, I have represented a number of attorneys, and in a different community, there was an attorney who died at age 78, and we talked on the phone a couple of times a week and became friends. And as he got older, he would call me under in the pretext that he was asking a legal question. We were both estate planning. But it really was, he just needed to talk to somebody. And so I thought about this. Here he is, a wonderful attorney. He used to be called the attorney's attorney in South King County. And if attorney has a problem, you went to him. But he's now approaching the end of his life. And he has nobody to share what was most important to him, what sustained him. And so I've been working on an article, and I just want to share just a few words I have in it. If something sustains you, and brings you a sense of sacredness, then we need a forum to share that. The privilege and honor of being invited into people's lives to solve problems is diminished when that honor is not part of our professional discourse, and it is not part of our professional. I have not been to one CLE where they talked about it. Now, I may be going to the wrong CLEs, and I've been going, by the way, for most of my career to the Advanced Estate Planning 2-day class, and I have not heard anybody at any length. There may have been a side comment. I think it's the professional position is, well, that's up to you to deal with that. You'll have to support yourself. You'll have to lift yourself up, but it's not part of our professional discourse. And it took me 2 years to kind of think about that. And I can kind of get heated about it, so I forgive me for just a second, but I want to share this with you. I thought about standing back from the practice after 2 years. I'm looking back on it with, my 2 kids are practicing, and nothing I'm saying here is intended to express their feelings. These are mine. And there's a metaphor that I've been using for a long time, and it's a paradox. It's called a bright sadness. And a bright sadness is simply when you get older and you get retired. I loved your question over here, by the way, that you have a more spacious view of reality. When I was 25 and out of law school, my view was like this, and then it gets very spacious, and you all know exactly what I'm talking about. And when you have a more spacious view of reality, an author, Richard Rohr, says, you enter into a bright sadness, which is just part of life. And that means it's bright because you can see the past and what went right in the future and what can happen, how wonderful it is to have your grandchildren. It's sad because for the same reason, your view is more spacious. You can look and see what happened in the past and what's going to happen to where this train ends up for us in the future. Now, when I look at myself, and I'm sure most of attorneys would agree with this, in my case, I would not have done, I'd have gone to the same community. I would have had the same clients. I love estate planning. I love problem solving, and I would have done the same thing. The sadness is I look back over the last 40 years, and at every turn, there was some degree of anxiety and foreboding. I know a wonderful woman that called it, what did you call it?
Dread.
Dread. There's such a
waking up with a sense of dread.
And it would visit me, at 3 in the morning. We live in a fear-based society, and just go with my spiritual flow here for a second. I know those words aren't usually, but just stay with me now. And so I believe, looking back on it, that we live in a profession with a foundation built on fear, and it's never talked about because it's too systemic. All the CLEs I go, in my opinion, use a veneer, and on top of that veneer, we talk about, this is particularly true in estate planning, I think, and we talk about, the law and how we deal with certain things. Never have I heard talking about the substance which drives us, and that's the anxiety and fear we live with. That certainly applies to me. That's one of the reasons I want a complete severance from the law, at least for a few years, and then maybe I can come back, but I need to get away from that for a while. I want you to picture something, and then I'll get off my high horse. So I'm gonna pick on the 2-day estate planning seminar simply because I'm more familiar with that. So I want you to picture this. Attorney comes from Goldendale or Raymond or Sela or someplace in our state, or Enumclaw, or the big firm in Seattle or Tacoma, and they're at a state planning seminar. Now, over the course, I counted this the last time I went. This is 2 years ago. I counted many times the speakers talked about malpractice. There's a sense of the accumulative effect after 2 days of hearing malpractice is interpreted by some into I'm incompetent, you see. I feel diminished. There is no form. There's no talk about the honor of practicing law, which is so important to me. You know, we're invited into people's lives in the most intimate, sometimes problems, and we have the honor and privilege of solving their problems. I've never heard that talked about very much. There may be separate groups in the law that talks about it, but it's not. I think we need to push back. And of course, you can tell my voice is getting kind of excited about this, but so I think that's the issue. So here's what happens, and then I'll be quiet. That attorney from that two-day estate planning is coming home. He feels diminished, or she feels diminished. They walk into their office. That cloud from the CLE pushes to the side because the secretary has 47 phone calls to return, and they have people to serve, and that's their honor. And we need to address that in this profession. So I'll get off my high horse.
And with that, I thank you, and I thank our faculty